You find yourself at the Inn of the Frolicking Fawn in the city of Cove. You have been summoned by the local wizard, Syntax. He sits at the table in an alcove, private but not hidden. Syntax waits for your introductions.
This says I'm Luxor the Warrior. I'm the last member of my family, as our town was pillaged by orc trolls.
I am the sorcerer, Gimbus. I use my powers to seek out ancient places and bother the spirits there.
I'm Splat. Nice to meet ya.
What? No, Splat. What's your character's name? Who are you in the world of Dungeons and Dragons?
Oh, sorry. I'm Splut the Rogue. I steal things. Sometimes I burgle things. Pleased to meet ya.
Well met, Splut. I will use all of my magical ability to disturb, annoy, disturb, and harass any and all spirits we might come across.
Wow, aren't you the guy who was scared of a hologram ghost book, so you cried like a baby and ran away?
Yes. But not in D&D.
You're all doomed.
Get upset on the internet.
Hi everybody and welcome to Retro Station 1989, and this is License to Play, where we review retro games based on licensed materials like movies, TV, comic books, novels, breakfast cereal mascots, fast food mascots. Who else? Well, let's just say if it was licensed and there was a retro game based on it, we review it. Alright. And this is the final week of... Hit it, Cambot. Cambot, hit it. Cambot Jr., why don't you hit...
Fantasy month.
Didn't feel right. It didn't feel right at all. No. That was just a really strange fantasy month. Fantasy month! That's fantasy month.
Whoa, sorry, Commander. We were just wrapping up our latest session of Dungeons and Dragons. Remember? You ordered Margot to learn more about D&D.
Oh yeah. Wow, how did it go?
That Dooch Baggins guy was devoured whole by a gelatinous cube. And I was able to behead a zombie. And Splat, well...
Dude, Splat played, huh? Oh, okay.
He tried to attack the darkness, but instead he ate his dice, then spent the rest of the time asking if Margot had any Mountain Dew.
Wow, so you guys really got into the spirit of Fantasy Month, eh, Margot?
Affirmative, Commander. I assimilated all of the known data about Dungeons and Dragons as you instructed. I felt to truly understand the game, I would need to participate as Dungeon Master.
Wow, yeah. That'd give you the real experience all right, Margot. Well, I'm glad you got that taken care of, because this week's evaluation needs someone who has experienced D&D to help me communicate its unique properties to the sponsors from Planet X.
Commander, I still have one step to complete.
Really? What's that?
I have to participate as a player, and to give myself the full spectrum of experience, I have chosen the mathematically least suited for the job.
Oh. Oh, no. No. You don't mean...
Yes, Commander Dan. Splat will be our Dungeon Master.
Good Lord. Well, even though there's been a new popular appreciation for the world's most popular role-playing game, let's take a closer look at the origins of Dungeons and Dragons. Roll it, Cambot. 1974. Disco. Wood paneling. Dude perms. Vests. Nixon. Flares. Known to you and me in the U.S. as bell-bottoms. There were no video games, though. Pong did not exist. There was no Star Wars. There wasn't a damn thing for indoor kids like yours truly to do, except board games like Gnip-Gnop or Ballbuster. How much of an indoors kid was I? I was still in my mother's womb. How's that for being an indoors kid? And while I was gestating, so are these gents, Ernest Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson. They were gestating an idea, two men in a Wisconsin basement, trying to ease the boredom for folks who like things like Tolkien, King Arthur, and ancient historical wars. They were deep into the hobby of strategy gaming, and they were coming up with an idea that would change everything. Which was basically, setting up mostly paper pieces and pretending to fight wars of the past, with predetermined outcomes, but allowing for victory conditions in defeat. What those fellows wanted was a game that was based on a fantasy world, filled with all the wonder and danger of creatures of fantasy fiction, including monsters from H.P. Lovecraft, Bosch paintings, and their own mysterious creations. So building off of the Avalon Hill game, Outdoor Survival, and their own medieval strategy game, Chainmail, Gygax and Arneson expanded two great sets of rules to give players the flavor of high fantasy in a grounded rule set. That game, of course, was Dungeons & Dragons. It was released as a 3-handbook set, with paper pieces to suffice for those without proper lead miniatures, which ought to not shock anyone because 1, lead is poisonous, and 2, fantasy role-playing games didn't exist at that point, so everything they were doing was the new thing. Imagine Dragon Quest, Final Fantasy, Ultima, Wizardry, Bloodborne. None of it would have existed because the inspiration for it, that game, didn't exist either. Hell, I barely existed at that point. And the game won awards like crazy in the years to follow, and won an all-time best role-playing rules in 1977, and let me tell you, Dungeons & Dragons White Box Edition is dry as hell. Brothers and sisters, it's a product of the strategy game world, adding elements of quote-unquote fun, where fun was anathema to the very concept of historical strategy wargaming, it seems. I'm telling you, D&D White Box was drier than Ben Shapiro's wife. But the game was popular, and so a revision was published in 1977, and that was the year of Star Wars and all of this sci-fi geekdom and everything coming to just all together, conglomerating. And the Dungeons & Dragons basic set, that's not quite the red box, allowed characters to go from level 1 all the way to level 3. If you wanted to go beyond level 3 with your character, well, buddy, you're looking at advanced Dungeons & Dragons, all right? You want to be ready for the advanced portion? This book, released in late 77, was accompanied by the Monster Manual and later the Dungeon Master's Guide. This was the first edition I ever owned. It was Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, released in 78, and I bought mine at a library sale in 1985 on a military base, along with a DMG and Monster Manual, which survived a long summer of learning how to play and run the game, until my mom's satanic panic stupid asshole church convinced her to toss my player's handbook into a bonfire. My DMG was squirreled away, and my love for the forbidden game of the devil only grew. Since the 80s, though, D&D has evolved, from a bunch of nerds hiding in dining rooms and basements to the very bullies who beat those same nerds up, owning pretty much all of the online space related to D&D. Ain't that a bitch? And more thirsty for fame C&D level celebs creating tabletop channels on YouTube. But am I bitter? Not at all. I'm not a bitter man. I'm so happy that a hobby that got me and so many others bullied, the target of homophobic slurs, and worse, is now a hobby everyone is getting involved in and enjoying. It makes me actually thrilled. Because when people say it gets better, I always felt that was kind of a false thing. It was like, yeah, it gets better if you move away. But I'm seeing everyone move in to where I was when I was like 10. And also because guys like this, Matt Lillard, and the brothers at Beetle and Grimm's Pandemonium Warehouse are creating modules for guys like me, DMs who want premium experiences that Matthew Lillard described like this. I'm paraphrasing. It's like a fan of Pearl Jam. You may be the kind of fan who grabs some tracks from Spotify and that's enough. You're a fan. Then there's the fan that'll grab every CD that comes out. That's a different level, but then that's expected of a fan, right? But then there's fans who grab every CD, every vinyl, every bootleg, as well as box sets of rarities, B-sides, and present a very curated example of their music. That's the kind of DM we're trying to appeal to. That's the kind of DM that I am. I'm literally running Curse of Strahd using Beetle and Grimm's legendary box, and I'm so super excited to get this thing on the road. And I paid almost $400 for my copy, which was used at a convention by the fellas from Beetle and Grimm's. And it was the last one of that production line before they did another reprint. And this version of D&D is literally the 5th edition of the world's most popular role-playing game. Here's some footage of an upcoming unboxing video for Beetle and Grimm's set that I did, and a signed print of my favorite AD&D painting by Jeff Easley. It's called With This Ring. It's framed on my wall in the retro station. So, Dungeons & Dragons, or D&D, has come a long, long way, and it's been part of my life since I was 8, 9, but certain things remain. Fantasy, dragons, dungeons, warriors, wizards, dwarves, elves, and more. And the license, well, that's lasted just about as long. And today, we're going to be talking about that D&D license, the very specific TSR D&D license from them olden days, and how it was used in the 80s.
So, Splat, you understand? You're running the game. You have an adventure picked out?
Sure do, Margot.
Now you know this is a big responsibility, but I want you to run the game however you like. You understand?
Yep, I got all the books you gave me, and all the other adventures and everything too. I'll be ready.
Understood.
Over and out.
This may have been a mistake.
Well, I'm not sure how good a DM Splat's gonna be, but man, talking about D&D has got me wanting to get back into the gaming table and run another group of folks through a dungeon beneath the yawning portal in Waterdeep. Or perhaps just throw a copy of Wrath of a Shardalon onto the table and play a quick beer and pretzels version of D&D. Or wait, I could play a D&D video game. You know, I bet you wouldn't believe how much of video games role-playing game history is centered around people trying to create a D&D experience when their dungeon masters, the referees and narrators of the role-playing game aren't available, or the other players. The long-standing truism about D&D is getting your group together all at once can be super difficult, and keeping them together is just as difficult. So much has been done by video game makers to try to get an experience kind of like D&D on a screen to play it by ourselves that we should take a look at all the games that weren't Dungeons and Dragons per se, but were definitely influenced by that experience. It starts with Akalabeth, Lord British's first game, where you basically fight the entire fucking monster manual in a quest to be the Knight of the Realm of Britannia. We move forward in time and we get Wizardry, Ultima, also by Lord British, and finally, after all these games, we get Final Fantasy. That's right. Final Fantasy is based on Dungeons & Dragons. In many ways, but in two major ways. First, Akitoshi Kawazu and 8 other members of Square's development team were in a Dungeons & Dragons group while developing Final Fantasy, playing constantly, drawing upon these adventures, but more importantly, the systems working under the hood in D&D to craft a rule set for Final Fantasy. Kawazu-san also created the Romancing Saga series as well. Of Final Fantasy, Akitoshi Kawazu said, "As far as my role in the game went, I was mainly in charge of the battle system and battle sequences. For that, I tried to make it as close to Dungeons & Dragons as possible. That was my goal." And did he ever get Final Fantasy close to Dungeons & Dragons? The first Final Fantasy is straight up the D&D way of spellcasting, as in spells per day rather than the later games using magic points to power spells. And more than that, the class system, which later they called a job system or just gave you one type of character, and basically innovated all the way to not having them at all. But the important thing for me, the mages of Final Fantasy, the white, black, and red, seem like OG Final Fantasy, right? It's the innovation Final Fantasy brought to role-playing games for the Nintendo. Well, that's lifted whole from Dragonlance. No lie. From battle systems and magic to classes and equipment restrictions, Final Fantasy owes a lot to Dungeons & Dragons.
Are you ready, you guys?
Yep.
I await my chance to leap into adventure.
Audible sigh. Go on, Splat. Begin Dungeons & Dragons.
You find yourselves on the craggy spires of the Warlock's Spine, the mountain range between the lands of the Crimson King and the realms of the Goodly Folk.
I don't believe this.
So, D&D is in the DNA of modern video games. No lie, not just role-playing games, but this license really blew up in 1988 when TSR themselves decided to jump into the video world. The story begins with SSI. We talked about them during the Star Trek episodes. They were the go-to company for translating a tabletop game to a video game. Starfleet Battles was a triumph in pleasing, well, pretty much just the people who like that kind of thing, which was a lot, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't designed to attract people to that kind of gaming experience within the video game hobby. But TSR at the time, prior to being engulfed and absorbed by a toy conglomerate, Hasbro, till all are one, was run by pretty uncompromising gamers, dungeon masters, and incredible writers. So SSI was the clear choice to translate the worlds of Dungeons & Dragons for the video gaming contingent of role-playing game fans. Which isn't to say they were their first choice. They looked at Capcom, EA, a couple other different companies, but finally, when SSI presented to them their idea, they went with them and never looked back. And the game that came out of that was Pool of Radiance, set in the wildly popular Forgotten Realms, that world of Drizzt Do'Urden and Baldur's Gate, Water Deep and Neverwinter, and the game was designed using the original TSR module, the writing inside, and to a freshly minted PC gamer like myself, it was a revelation. It was Final Fantasy, but really D&D. And I've never ever lied to you, my dear Space Pirates, nor would I. And my Planet X sponsors, I apologize. I wouldn't normally, but get this. I lied. Just now. Let me explain. Okay. Here's the lie. I'm sorry. I own one of the greatest TSR role-playing games, complete in box, for the Nintendo Entertainment System. It's this game right here. Pool of Radiance. But here's the thing. While this game is an impressive example of translating a computer game to the NES, and nails it, my copy is dead. I need a new copy. You can't hear it, but I mean, there's literally pieces of the CPU rattling around in the case on the game. I mean, it sounds like a pachinko machine made out of transistors, capacitors, and internal batteries. Thing's fucking dead. I mean, I'm going to get another copy of Pool of Radiance to put in this box, but my copy's gone. So, I'm going to send the broken copy over to John Riggs, see what he can do about it for open cart surgery. But the game we're going to be evaluating today is this piece of shit. Now, I'm not, and it deserves to be nailed to a fucking cross and die for its sins. Let's get into that, and I promise you, I'll never lie to you again. But today we're going to talk about Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Heroes of the Lance. So, SSI made some games. Let's take a look at the pile of PC and Commodore 64 games based on D&D. Look at this. Pool of Radiance, Curse of the Azure Bonds, Secret of the Silver Blades, Pools of Darkness. But while these games are at times competent and at times sublime, here's the lie I told. And for it, I do apologize. Because these games, the Gold Box Forgotten Realms games, they actually weren't the first games SSI made for TSR on the NES, nor the first game I owned by TSR. Let's get to that game in a moment. The PC console war began around '88 for me. My dad was in the military, as a systems analyst, a programmer and hero of the 80s, basically. And more than that, my dad was a great lover of tech and video games, and was really all about the arcade experience at home. We had an Atari 2600, moved through the consoles, depending on whichever one delivered either an arcade level of play or an arcade experience as close as possible to what the arcades provided, which is why we picked up a ColecoVision. It had the best versions of Donkey Kong and Zaxxon, bar none. But in 1989, as the Retro Station legend goes, we got our NES, and we also had a PC. And in that time, the PC was great at video game experiences, unlike anything on the consoles or in the arcades. My father loved a game called Empire, War of the Century, and at that point, my brother and sister and I loved Super Mario Brothers. My dad also liked games on the NES, but the PC seemed to always set the bar so far and beyond the NES's capabilities that the war in our house over the better way to play games seemed to be dominated by the PC every time the subject was brought up. Until Dragon Warrior. My dad and I played Dragon Warrior for the NES, known as Dragon Quest now, grinding through the game as hard as we could, and we beat the game together. And though he really didn't get into Final Fantasy, he respected the RPGs the NES was capable of doing, like Faxanadu, and Dragon Quest, of course. But if there was a moment I nearly dedicated my life to PC gaming, it was right after playing the game we're evaluating this week. This is Heroes of the Lance, by Satan, made to make children cry and fill hearts with hatred for the Nintendo Entertainment System. I'm only kidding. A little bit. This is Heroes of the Lance, but it's by Natsume and FCI. And a company you may not be familiar with, but if you already know what a shit show they are, you won't be surprised that US Gold had a piece of this turd and helped make it. And I'm not kidding you, alright? This game, holy God, published by FCI and the devil to make your rectum itch. No lie. Let's take a look. If you've watched my videos in the past, you know that the final segment basically is the part where me and Cambot Jr. put together the context for the game, letting you know about the time it was made in, my personal experience with either renting or purchasing it, and some little bit about how it was crafted by programmers and system techs, and that's all horse shit. Not this game. This game was crafted in the devil's butthole and farted into the faces of every shitbag serial killer in hell to create the music and sound effects. Oh, and the paper wiping old Scratch's butt crack? Well, that was the design document. And the graphics? Why, that's a transcript of the fever dreams of John Wayne Gacy and the walls of some lost temple where they painted frescoes of punched adorable kittens. Look, this game is shit. Alright? It's based on Heroes of the Lands, a great series of modules and books. And you direct the worst animated versions of the Heroes of Dragonlance into various pits and regret spending a single wheat penny on any of this goddamn nonsense. I forgot this game even existed in my past, that I even played it. And unfortunately, because my favorite game by SSI for the NES, that would be Pool's Radiance, is in tatters, literally a shake-a-weight or whatever now, I have to evaluate this monstrosity. First of all, the game features stats and abilities from D&D, but controls like a blind chimp trying to impregnate a beach ball. This game is an assault on eyeballs, your feelings, your earballs, everything. Now I know, I don't usually get mad. I'm not an angry video game nerd style guy. I try to look on the bright side of life, and I feel like you don't understand. You think I'm joking here that this is some kind of dodge or hustle to not review a game. Fuck that. No. All right? I feel bad for doing this, but because I know you won't believe me, I'm going to leave you in the clutches of this store brand Lord of the Rings for just 20 seconds, letting you watch this gameplay footage. Because, oh, by the way, yes, this is from World of Long Plays. Big ups to whoever put their mind to the task of trying to defeat this horrid, wretched pickle fart of a game, because I would never do that. But you're going to get 20 seconds of this. Just 20. And again, I'm sorry. Do you see? Do you see? This is the thing I'm trying to evaluate here. A literal fail on every single level. It's so goddamn terrible that the Wikipedia entry has zero information in the plot section. Because you know that to write anything in there, even though you know you're anonymous and writing whatever you want, you know in your heart it would be a goddamn lie to put any words in there that have anything to do with the plot, because this game has zero plot. Nothing. And I will quote my inspiration for any video game commentary, Sean Baby. Even if you do manage to cause your weapon's pixels to touch a monster's pixel, which is no small feat for someone with a non-responsive remote control Frankenstein with a 4-inch knife, the monster's probably going to be okay, since the game rolls an imaginary set of dice to see if you actually did damage. This is a lot what it would be like if the Mario Brothers randomly exploded every few jumps. So if you do somehow practice to the point where you become world champion of remote control Frankensteining, there's a high percentage chance that you'll still suck balls at Heroes of the Lands. So of course, only one question remains. Does Heroes of the Lance have a license to play? If you can't answer that question yourself, you need to turn up the volume on YouTube, because you didn't hear me tell you that this thing is legit garbage. So no, of course not. This thing doesn't have a license to exist, much less play. And if I didn't already tell you, I don't damage my video games. I'm not going to drill it or nail it to the cross. Oh, you son of a bitch. I will throw it on the shelf and forget that it exists, and hopefully, one day, my heart will heal from this damage. But, for now, I've got to say no. Of course not. No. Nein. Nicht. Nicht wahr. You will not have a license to play. Sorry, I don't know what came over me just now. I really don't fucking like this game. I'm not lying. It sucks balls and shaft. And just dirty diapers. It's the worst. It is the worst. Margot, how did D&D go? Did you learn anything?
I understand Dungeons and Dragons now, but I will never understand Splat.
Well, now, with that knowledge, you can see why this evaluation could have ended only one way, right?
Affirmative, Commander. This game was vile.
Right? Okay, go ahead and launch off the evaluation of Planet X. And I want to thank everyone for joining me for Fantasy Month this year.
Oh, what a terrible way to finish up Fantasy Month. Fantasy Month! I don't know why I slapped myself on the face. That's fantasy month.
That was Fantasy Month. But more than anything else, all right, folks, I hope that you had fun time playing fantasy games, eating all that turkey on Thanksgiving, watching some fantasy movies, reading some fantasy books, and thank you so much to some of my heroes, the guys over at Continue. The Continue show has been, wow. I had a pretty rough year when I first found these dudes, and they made it a lot easier to handle. So thank you, Paul, Nick, Josh, for real, and especially everyone who helps edit over there, Luke, everybody, guys. Thank you so much for making a show that really sticks with me, and my wife too. She loves you guys, especially big ups to Josh, who she loves particularly well, and big ups also to everyone this month who played some fantasy games, because that's what it's all about in Fantasy Month. I'm not gonna play the thing again. I can't keep editing it in. All right, but that was Fantasy Month, and we're moving on. There's going to be the Advent calendar. Keep an eye on for that. Also, this year. Oh, yes. December's going to be very, very cool. Very fun. And there's a special guest for every episode of my holiday fantabulous, fantastical, whimsical, wonderful time of the year. Oh, wait. Hold on. I'm getting a message. Oh, the war on Christmas has begun. I'm getting another message. Christmas won again. Every time, right, Christmas? Damn. Hanukkah doesn't even get a good sneak attack in. I'm saying this, maybe you guys bust out the baseball bats and really go to town, you'd win. But no, every year. Black Friday all the way through January 1st, practically. Anyway, this has been Fantasy Month. And more important than anything I've just said, or will ever say, or have said in the past, remember to always, always, always stay retro. Peace.
Get upset on the internet. You're assault adult. Throwing out a hissy fit, your views ain't in the millions, and every up and comer is a threat to what you're dealing. And instead of getting better, you just spout up on your Facebook, crying on your Twitter bit about how bad your case look. In case you didn't get it yet, allow me to rephrase it. You cry more than my 4-year-old. I'm actually amazed, like you couldn't even see the forest for the trees.